Hey folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I know you might notice some change in the environment this time around, and this is because I've been called back to college and this is my new quarantine room. I'll be shifting to my main room in maybe 3 or 4 days, but I'm very excited to see what this change brings to my schedule and what I do in the future. But I'll make sure that I keep making videos on microservices, and I have other plans as well going forward in December. And we'll see where that leads us. But for now, let's just jump into this video. Now, this video is about Azure API Management. Now, you might remember this service is something we have discussed before as well. So we'll first jump right into our OneNote to see what we're going to cover in this particular video. So first we'll look at what is Azure API Management Service. Now, this is something which you already looked at in a previous video, as I said. And in this video, we're going to look at much detail on how we connect different services to it and how we can add a lot of other configuration options to this service. Then we're going to look at what is Azure Active Directory. Now, you may have heard of Azure AD before. In this video, I'll give you a very brief introduction of what Azure AD is. There are multiple other resources available for Azure AD which are much better and much more extensive than the coverage we'll be having in this video, but I'll just give you a heads up, a start. Right, so that is something which we'll do here. After that, we'll look at app registration. So I'll understand what app registrations are and why they are important and what is the role they play in configuring your application with Azure AD. Right, that is something we'll look at. And then finally, we're going to integrate our service with API management, but we'll first secure our service. We'll see how we secure our service and then we integrate that with the API management service as well. Alright, so let's just go to the first module now. Yeah, so Azure API walkthrough. So then in this particular section, what you're going to do is we'll first go to the API management instance that we have created. After that, we're going to explore the entire section. So we'll look at the API tab. There are multiple tabs in that section, as you may imagine. So there's an API tab as well. So there is where you add the API. So we'll look at how the process looks like. That's something we'll do. After that, we'll see what are inbound and outbound rules, like what are these rules and what do they mean and how you can add them to your routes, right? And then lastly, we'll figure out how to add authentication, right? So this is something we'll have to see that where is the tab, what tab should we use, what service we should use, and what is the entire workflow for adding authentication to your API management. Alright, so now what we'll do is we'll go to the portal and we'll register a container, Azure Container Apps with our API Management Service. Now, Azure Containers App, as you might have heard of, is a very new service which is entirely serverless by Azure, and we're going to explore that just a little bit by adding that to our API Management Service, and then we'll play with different settings there. So we'll look at ingress, like how to control traffic into your instance, and then you also look at how you can enable subscription and other forms of control access to your service. So we'll just play around with those settings as well in the portal. So let's just go over there right now. Alright, so let's check out the API management instance now. So these on the right, you can see there's a portal to access this particular API management. And on the left, you have a lot of tabs here. So let's just explore all these tabs. So the most important one which you can see is the APIs tab, where you can add and modify APIs. So we'll just take a look there. So here you can see I already have 2 APIs defined, and then you can add new APIs as well. And how do you add new APIs? You can add either a manual description, create from definition, or you can use any other Azure resource which you have already implemented, right? So this is something which you can work with. So let's just first look at my API which I already added before. So this particular API has a container app in the backend. So here you can see there's a Azure Container App demo 1. Yeah, so there you can see it's the demo 1 with the container app. So let's just also take a look at the demo app, because container apps are also a very new service in itself. So we'll just quickly check that out. So there it is. So I'll just open a new tab here. Now we'll play around with different things. So let's just check out my settings container app is opening in the background. So first, let's just look at the settings. So here in the settings, you can see I already have a lot of things here. And there's a thing called subscription required. So usually by default, it is turned on. So when a subscription is turned on, say for example, I'll just keep it there. And I'll put user authorization to none now, as the default values are. And I'm going to save this particular configuration here, right? So what I've done is I just enabled subscription. Now let us try and access this particular API and see if we can do it through the browser or not. Alright, so for that, what I'll do is I'll go to the test section. So here, if I click on any of the operations, it will give me an endpoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this endpoint, and then I'm going to access my service. So this is the endpoint. So you can see there's no suffix here, just the base URL. This is just one URL. It's the same URL as my API gateway. There is no suffix. There's also ways to add suffix when you're creating an when you're creating an API in API management. You can add suffixes. So we'll look at that later on when we create a app service. When we merge an app service into our this API. So there you can see access denied due to missing subscription key. So this is what happens when you enable subscription key in the settings there. So there where it is, there it is. So now what I'll do is I'll just quickly revert that change. So we'll play around with other configurations as well, other things as well. So first of all, let's look at the container apps now. So this is the container app. This is very basic options available right now. They'll be added more as time progresses. This is the idea of using the container, and this is the application URL. So if I try to visit my application URL, I'll just show you how it looks like. So we're going to try out new things here. So this is the landing page for Azure Container Apps. Right? So I can know that this URL is working now. All right. Now what I want to do is, we already played around with the subscription header. I'll just remove this requirement for now so that we are able to access our service. And now I'm going to click on save. Right. So once I click on save here, and now I'm going to visit the same website again. So I'll just refresh the page, and we'll see if we can access it now. There it is. So we have removed that requirement, and now we can access the backend here. Now what are the other things which you can play around with? Let's just go to our application now. So this is the container app which I have. On the left, you can see there's a tab called Ingress. So Ingress is just how you manage incoming traffic, right? This is the place where you can manage how your traffic comes into your application. So here you can see Ingress is enabled, and this allows the application to receive requests. Now, for example, I just disable this Ingress now. How will that affect my API management instance, right? So that will just, will it still continue serving, or will it disable it? So once this is disabled here, and if I go back to my page here and try to refresh it, I'll no longer be able to access it, because Ingress is disabled on the backend, right? So any of these modifications you make can have direct impact on what you're trying. And moreover, you can change the port here. So in that case, you'll have to specify what port your service is exposed at. Also allow traffic only within your virtual network and not external, like not public. So all of these settings are available here. So you can play around with these as well. And there's also a place to add authentication. Now this is where you add authentication. So now you have to select a server, right? So what server do you select? I already have an AD server. It's just a name. AD is Active Directory. This is a name which I gave to this server. How do you add these servers is through this portal again. So if you slide down to the developer portal area, you will see there's a section called OAuth 2.0 plus OpenID Connect. Now when you go to this point, you'll have the option to add different servers, right? So if you click on plus add, you'll see what details you need to serve, what details you need to provide to add a server here. So you need a client registration page. All of these basic Authentication 2.0 parameters are here, right? So this is not something I'm going to talk in detail in this video, because it's a separate topic in itself. It's a very extensive topic, and I encourage you to check out these protocols, and I encourage you to figure out how these work. Like OpenID is just built on top of OAuth 2.0, so just try to understand the basics of how these things work. Maybe I'll make a future video on this, but yeah, this is the idea behind it. So this is the workflow in which you can add authentication to your API gateway as well, right? But we're not going to do it in this video right now. All right, so this is a very basic walkthrough of the API management service. Now let's just go back to our OneNote to see if we have missed something. All right, yeah, so we have missed the inbound and outbound rules. So let's just go back and check that out again. So in any of the APIs, say the demo 1 API, if I click on it, you'll see I have the option. Let's just load. Yeah, I see I have the option to add inbound and outbound processing. Now what are these things, right? So if you want to know more about this, let's just click on the policies tab. So either you can add policies on your own. So places like these, you can add policies like you can rate limit, like a particular IP address can only send these many requests per minute, right? So all of those things can be managed here. So either you can just add a policy directly here, or you can add a policy. There's already some kind of boilerplate ready here. So you can say choose between filter IP addresses, you can limit call rate, you can mock responses. So all of these things are already built in. So if I want to add an IP filter, I'll just specify what are the allowed IPs, what are the blocked IPs, and then I'll just change the configuration on its own. And this is the idea behind inbound and outbound rules. So you can add, so inbound rules will be applied when the request is sent to the backend. It's not reached the backend yet. So before reaching the backend, this is the policy which is going to be applied. And output processing is the processing which is done after the request is sent from the backend. These are two sections which you can also utilize to add so much of functionality to your entire workflow. That is all. That is the entire walkthrough of this API instance. Now let's check out the next section. Okay, so now we'll try to understand what exactly Azure AD is. So first of all, before we begin with any of that, let's first look at these three terms here. So it's very important to understand what these three terms are, and this will just help you in better understanding what the entire structure looks like. So first of all comes the subscription. Now these are words you might hear a lot around if you use Azure. But now we just look at a very brief idea of what these things are. You can just go ahead and look at some documentation to understand better, and there's a link as well provided here. So I'll just put it in the description so you can check it out there as well. But I'll just go over this very quickly here. Alright, so first of all, what is subscription? A subscription is just a Azure account which ties together all of different services which you're using, right? So if you have a subscription, it ties together whatever, like if you're using a Kubernetes service, using an app service, all of that is tied to a subscription. Then there's a tenant. Now tenant is the organization which is going to own and manage all of the instances. So the tenant which I use is the student ambassadors tenant. That is my student ambassadors organization owns all of these things. There's also a Microsoft tenant, and then like any organization which you use, your own college, all of those things can manage your entire instances. That is what tenant means. Now the directory is the Azure AD service. Now it has information about all the users in your organization, and now this is tied to a tenant. So every tenant has a directory, and every tenant can have only one directory. Right, but it can be a directory can be spread across multiple subscriptions. So you can have multiple subscriptions depending on what you want, but the tenant and the directory will have a one-to-one relationship. That is what a directory is. All right, so now let's just look at what are the two offerings that Microsoft allows to expose your services externally. So if you have any service which is running and you want to expose it, now how do you go about doing that? Right, so there are two offerings. First of all, there's AD B2B, which is Azure Active Directory business to business. Now what this does is it allows people from other directories to come to your directory to collaborate on your apps. So what you can do is you can send invites to people from other organizations. For example, if you're working on an application which is spread across multiple organizations, or if you want two universities to collaborate with each other, so you can send invites to the other organization, and then those people appear as guests in your directory. Right, so that is how you enable them to access your applications. Right, so what happens is they stay in your directory but as guests. So you can give them all the permissions that your users have, but they'll remain as guests there. Alright, so you can then try to once their job is done, you can then remove them from the directory as well. And that is the basic idea behind AD B2B. So this is the business to business interaction. Alright, so as I said, guest users can be managed the same as employees. They can be added to the same groups and all those stuff. That is how Azure AD B2B works. On the other hand, B2C is an offering which is most suitable if you want to expose your application to the general public. Alright, so what happens here is you have multiple options. You can have your user sign in through their social logins or through an Microsoft account, so whatever way they prefer, and then there's a separate directory for all those users, right? Those are not the same as your tenant users, but there's a separate directory for all of these users. They have a separate managed directory, right? That is the idea behind these two things. And even Azure AD B2B also has some integration. I've read about they're also adding social logins to that, but that is not a distinction between B2B and B2C. The distinction which you need to keep in mind is that B2C is like a separate directory of public users, and B2B is like an extension of your directory, right? So what you're doing is basically adding users from the organizations into your organization. That is the basic idea behind these things. And there's extensive documentation and a lot of videos on this topic, so I'll encourage you to check that out if you're interested. But this is just a very brief idea of what these things are. Right, so this graphic I like particularly well because this tells us how B2C works. So you have your customers which can use their social logins, or they can use they can use their business or government IDs and all of those things, and they can securely connect to your applications. Right, so that is how B2C works. And all right, that is one of the ideas. B2C is really nice way of going about things. Now we'll go into the portal to see what B2C looks like. So I just wanted to give you a glimpse into what B2C is, but that is not of use in this video right now, but I'll just give you a very short glimpse of that. And later on, after we are done with that, we'll go into the application and the other parts, right? So let's just go into the portal first of all. All right, to demonstrate Azure AD B2C, I'll have to switch my directory, and let me just go over this tab here, and I'll switch to a tenant which I created, which is a different tenant. Yeah, so now let me search for B2C here. So there it is, Azure AD B2C. Now here you can see I have the same idea which we used before. So here you can have your user. So this is my AD B2C instance. Now since this is a public facing service, so you also have user flows here. So this is a very interesting thing to notice. So you can add policies. So I have two policies implemented: sign up, sign in, and password reset, right? So this policy allows my users to sign up to my service and sign in, right? And this policy allows them to reset their password, right? So you can add any policies you want here. So this is some kind of a way of defining it. And then this tab shows you what users there are. So I'm just not going to go into it because there's a lot of information there. For all the users who access my particular application are registered here in this users tab here. So you can take a look at that. These are different from my directory, right? This is separate, maintained separately. And I can see there is app registration. So you can also register applications directly inside of this Azure AD B2C. So what these registrations are, we'll also talk about them in the next module. So what app registrations are is this: they allow my B2C instance to identify my applications, right? So for example, if I have an Android prod, this is an application which I have. So what happens is, if I have an Android application and I'm trying to use that application to authenticate users, what I'm going to do is my application is going to make request to this Azure AD B2C instance, right? But how does this instance know that the request that is coming to it is coming from my application alone, right? So what I do is I create a registration in Azure AD B2C and I use those credentials, the client ID, the client secret, all those credentials, and I use these credentials from my Android application when I'm making that request, right? So AD B2C will know, okay, this is verified, this is my application is making that request. This is a way of identifying my application, right? This is one of the ways, and also you can know how to redirect your users back to this application. This is also possible through registrations. So this is my registration. So this is a very, very brief walkthrough of this entire service here. And now let's just go back to our OneNote and proceed with the module. We'll have interesting things to cover now. Alright, so we've covered these things. Now let's just move on to the next module. Alright, so once you're clear with what Azure AD is and what the two offerings are, Azure AD B2C and B2B, now let's just look at how we can secure our app service. So the first step in securing an app service is an app registration. Now what exactly is an app registration? An app registration is a way of letting Azure AD know about the existence of your app in very simple terms, right? So for example, if I want my application, if I want Azure AD to know that, okay, this is my application who's making the request to authenticate, how does it know, right? Because app service is independent, Azure AD is independent. So I'll have to figure out some way to link these two together so that whenever a request for authentication comes in, Azure AD will know, okay, there needs to be some way to figure out, okay, this is my application, not some other application who's asking to authenticate users. That is one of the things. And the other thing is, where do I send the users after they have authenticated, right? So when for example, if they have successfully completed the authorization, now where do I forward these users to? And so I need to have a very verifiable address for my application to send these guys to, right? So all of these details are stored in an app registration. That is basically what app registration is. You can read more about it here in this particular documentation. Apart from that, now once that is clear, what app registration is, we'll now go to the portal and figure out how we can, do all these steps. Like how can we register app service and how can we connect both these things together, app service and Azure AD. But first, let's look at our diagram to understand it better, right? For example, here in this blue rectangle, there's an Azure AD, right? So this is imagine this is your Azure AD, and now this is your app service on the right, and this is an app service. Now, how do I make Azure AD know about my app service? I create an app registration, right? So this red circle is app 1. This is one app registration which I made in Azure AD, right? So when you look at the app registration page, once you've created it, you'll have a lot of other options. So we'll look at those when we go to the portal, but two important options which we are concerned about right now is Expose API and Authentication, right? So Expose API will allow you to add some scopes, right? For example, this will allow me to tell that, okay, this app service will require these scopes, like these permissions, say for example, reading user information or other kind of scopes which you want to define, right? So this is where you define all of those things in the Expose API tab, right? And Authentication, what will do is you'll provide a redirect URI. So what is a redirect URI? A redirect URI is telling Azure AD where to send users after authentication, right? So that is something which you provide in this app registration page here in this app one. All right. So we have seen the Azure AD side of things, right? We have seen that in Azure AD we've created an app registration and we have specified, okay, this is the scope I want to expose through my app service, and this is where you need to send the users after they are authenticated, right? Now there's something missing, right? Because let's just look at the app service now. The app service has no idea about your registration in Azure AD, right? So whenever any request which comes into Azure AD, whenever request comes into app service, the app service is just going to service it right away, right? Because it is not going to authenticate, it's not going to force users to go to the server and authenticate because it doesn't know about that existence, right? So there needs to be something on this end as well, which will link this to the Azure AD thing. And that is why we have an authentication tab in the app service as well. So what this tab will do is Here we're going to register our app registration, right? So we're going to provide the details of our app registration, and then the app service will know, okay, this is how I have to service clients. Now once this is done, let's look at our portal to understand it better, right? So this is just a very brief idea to make you clear about what are the two different parts of securing a service. Now let's just look at okay, so this is my demo app. Now let's just go over to the authentication tab as I mentioned. So here you can see there's a tab for authentication, and there's no authentication yet, right? So what I'm going to do is, let's just first try to hit our URL, right? So let's just try to access this and see if it requires authentication or not. So this is my website URL. I'll just try to open this here, and there you go. It doesn't require any authentication at all. It just opens up the web page. All right, now let's just go into the authentication part. So here's my authentication tab. Yeah, so now I need to add some kind of identity provider here. But first, we don't have it yet, right? We first have to register our app with Azure AD. So we'll first go to our app registration. I already created an app registration for this. Yes, this is the overview of my app registration. So when you're creating an app registration, you don't have to specify redirect URI, you don't have to specify any client secrets, any sort of that things. You just create an app registration with just the name and who's going to access your app registration, right? That is the only details you provide on the time of creation. So once created, you can add other details as well. So first of all, let us look at authentication tab here. That's what we're going to explore now, right? How do you add authentication? So as you can see, we can see there's a way of adding a platform. Platform is just another word for like what kind of application you're building, right? So I'll just use a web application here. And now, as I mentioned in the OneNote, that we need to add a redirect URI. Now this redirect URI needs to be the URI of your app service, right? So Azure AD needs to know where to send your users after authentication. So this is the URI for that. Now this is really important. The redirect URI will be your app service URI, and then there will be an additional path concatenated with it. Right? So this is that path ./login/AD/callback. So this is what you have to add after your app service URI. This is your redirect URI. So I've already added that here. So this is done, and you have to also tick on ID token. So this is the way we are going to go about an authentication. I really encourage you to learn about implicit and hybrid flows, like what are these flows, because it's not the subject of this video right now, but it's a really interesting topic, and this will help you understand this better, like why we're not using access tokens and why you're using ID tokens here. That is all. So once all of that is done, you click on save. So this part is complete, at least authentication part is complete. You have told Azure AD where to send users after authentication, right? Now we'll have to expose an API. So here we have to specify what scopes does our app require, like what are the permissions that our app requires, right? So I already created that as well. Now you have to first create an application ID URI. Now this is auto-generated, so you don't have to create on your own. And then you have to add a scope here, right? The scope can be anything. It just depends on your application. So I already added a scope here, dummy scope. Read some info, that is the display information for this kind of scope. So alright, this is there. So we have completed the two steps for the app registration. We have exposed an API and we have added authentication to it, right? So this is the two steps are complete. Now how do I add this information to my app service, right? That is what we want to know. So let's just go back to app service. Now let's just see what details are required to add my app registration into this app service. Alright, so let's just look at the details that we require here. So the first thing is we have to add an identity provider, and we're going to choose Microsoft for this one. And here you can see there are three options I have: create a new registration, pick an existing registration, or provide details of an existing registration. So we'll choose the second one here because you already have an app registration put in place. Now we'll try to select it from this list here. Now since it's a very extensive list, the other way I prefer is just providing details of my registration. So for details, I'll have to go back to my app registration. So first of all, I'll look at what are specific parameters I want. I need a client ID. I need something called a client secret. Right? So for these two values, let's just go back to my app registration. Okay, so this is the overview page here, and if you look at the details here, we can see there's a client ID present here. So that thing is sorted. Now what I require is a client secret. So for that, if you look at the left pane, you'll see there's a certificates and secrets tab here. So we'll just go over that. So you can already see I have a secret created before, but I won't be able to access the value for it now. So I have to create a new client secret, and I'll just add a name, say demo2, and I'll just keep the expiry for the recommended period. So once the secret is up, I'll copy this value here, and now I have both the client secret and the client ID. So I've pasted the client secret here, and for the client ID, let's just go back to the overview and copy the client ID. There it is. That's all. Now we'll just see this is something which is normal. We have to require authentication, and this is the response which will be provided to people who are not authenticated. and I'll just click on add here. So once this is added, then we'll test out our endpoint again. Yeah, so now you can see it has identified that our app registration is named backend app. Right, so from the details we provided to it, it was able to identify our app registration. Now let's just quickly go back and try to access our site which we used to access it earlier. Let's just hit the URL again. Now so this is the URL. I'll just open it here, and let's just see if it asks for an authentication or not. So there you go. So you can see here it's asking for permissions here from our backend app. Now this is the app registration which we had created, and now it's asking for permission. When we click on accept here, then it will take us directly to the app landing page here. So there you go. So this is the idea behind using the authentication. So this is pretty much covered now. Let's just go back to OneNote and see what is left. Alright, so we have looked at app registration. We understood why app registration is required, and we have also authenticated our app service and assigned the app registration to it. So we have connected our app registration with the app service, and we also understood it in a very high level using this diagram here. Now what next? Right, so right now what we have focused on is just the app service part. We have secured the app service, but we haven't talked about the API management yet, correct? So in this particular module, what we'll do is we'll connect our app service, this entire block which we worked on right now, with the API management instance. So that is the first step of this module. Then we'll disable the subscription required. So all of these are options which are configurable, which we'll be doing in the portal itself. And then the last option, the last point here is something which I'll keep for later. And this we'll come back to this after we are done with the portal first. So just go over to the portal now. So I'll go to the API gateway. Now you can see in the APIs panel, I'm already in the API panel. So here you can see I have the option to add an API. So either you can manually define an HTTP API here, or you can use the first class integration with different API Azure services, right? So you can use a container app, or you can use a function app, or in different services. So I'll just click on function app, which is what I'm using right now. So we'll browse my function app through this selection here. So these are the two function apps which I have defined, and I'm going to use the demo app MSP because this is the one we registered the authentication in. Now this is my function here. I'll just click on select. Now there's an API suffix I have to use. So what this does is it tells me that at the end of my gateway URL, what is the suffix I should use. So this is the suffix which I'm using right now. I'll just click on create and wait for this to come up. So there you go. It is coming up now. Now these are things which are already discussed before. All these components, the inbound processing, outbound processing, we know what these things are. Now what I want to do is first of all look at the settings here. So we'll see how it is configured, and we'll try to make changes as suited. So here we can go down and see the subscription is enabled. I'll just disable this one now, and I won't select any authorization here. We can add over 2.2 authentication, but that is something which I'll discuss in the last point. So we'll just keep it none for now. I'll just save this now. Now to test our API gateway, what I'll do is I'll go to the test tab, and now here I'll just click on any operation. I just want to get a particular URL for me to test in the browser. So this is the URL. So if you observe, it first has the API gateway URL, then it has my API suffix, and then it has what function I'm accessing, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on a new tab, and I'm going to try to access this particular URL. So I'll just paste it here, and I want to see if the flow is similar to what we saw in the app service and directly accessing it. So they should be both the same things, right? So there you go. It shows pretty much the same thing here. So that is how you have put your app service behind an API management instance. All right. So that covers it. Now let's just go back to my OneNote to see what are the next steps. So yeah, we have so basically to sum up, what we have done is we have taken our app service which are authenticated, and we've put it behind an API management instance, right? So we have not authenticated, or we have not dealt with the API management service in itself, right? So what you can do is, so since we already had a registration for the backend, you can add a similar app registration for the client tab, and this client tab will be this API management instance. So basically you'll have two app registration in Azure AD, and then you can add permissions to allow this client registration to access the backend registration. Right? That is what you can do. So it is listed out in very detailed documentation, which I'll link in my description, and then you can check that out. But that is the idea. What you can do is, instead of just plainly putting your app service behind the API management, you can even add API management into Azure AD. That is something which you can also explore on your own. This is something which is really interesting because this is something which can be used across all applications. Whatever you develop, you have to know principles of authentication, how that works, what is OAuth 2.2, what is OpenID Connect. So I'll encourage you to explore this on your own. That's why I'm stressing on it so much, because when you explore it, you'll understand how powerful this is and how seamless this entire experience becomes with Azure. So that is all for this video. And let me know if you have any doubts whenever you're exploring any of these concepts, or even the concept which is there in the Microsoft documentation, and I'll do my best to solve it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.